Let's start with something that I think many of us are noticing these days. It's the fact that our memory is getting worse and worse. Maybe a few years ago, if I would ask you, can you just remember the phone number of your parents or your partners? You could easily say that. Probably now it's a bit difficult. Let alone sometimes I even don't remember exactly what was my phone number. So dementia is actually a trend. Unfortunately, the predictions, as you see here, are getting into a very unfavorable situation. So we will lose our memory capacity. Research on that is absolutely crucial. Apart from that, there is an interesting study that is conducted by, it's known as the NUN study, and it's conducted by David Snowden, not the Edward one, the other one, in 1986. It's not a new research. So they wanted to know those who get to the old age, the time that Alzheimer actually kicks in, who are they? And are there maybe factors that they can predict the Alzheimer situation later in the age? So what they did, they found a very interesting research setup, which allowed them to do a very interesting research design. They went to a very special group of subjects, the nuns, not any nun. They managed to find access to 678 nuns who were all members of these sister schools of Notre Dame. And they were actually focusing on the ones from there who allowed for donating their brain to be studied after their deaths, because they needed to do this brain analysis to see how they can detect Alzheimer in their brain structure and then see what can predict. Anything in the brain or any other thing can predict the state of memory. Why did they go to the nuns? And why these people? If they would go to the DBI students, probably they couldn't actually compare them with each other. They are very divergent. You are very divergent in terms of, or heterogeneous in terms of the background, in terms of the study, in terms of the interest, and many other things. Nuns seem to be a more unified sample. So most of the other factors that can actually explain or sort of impact the variety within the sample will be canceled out. Because at the end, they wanted to know why some of these nuns develop Alzheimer earlier or stronger than the others. Still, there are a couple of other reasons for selecting nuns. Similar lifestyle, yes. There is one important factor that causes Alzheimer, and the researchers knew at the time, and that was the rival explanation, and that was drinking alcohol. That was the other reason to go to the nuns instead of perhaps going to the surgeons or any other type of groups. So that was a very special setting for them. So they were lucky and they managed to do the study. They got all the experiments and the tests on the brain after the death. They checked who had earlier and stronger Alzheimer. And at the end, they were looking for factors such as the type of brain structure and these things. But suddenly they bumped into one predictor, which was highly, strongly predicting the Alzheimer. And that was not related to the brain or anything else. It was related to a very interesting piece of information that they found from these nuns back in time when they were around age of 22, the time that they wanted to apply for this school, and they had to send a motivation letter saying that for this reason I would like to join the school. And when they looked at the letters they had, they found that depending on the complexity of the writing they had in their own letters, they can almost more than 90% predict if at the end of the age they will develop Alzheimer or not. So compare these two sentences from two different examples. One is the long sentence up and the other one is the short. They are coming from two different nouns. One developed Alzheimer earlier and stronger. The other one didn't. Which one is, you think? Well, the answer is actually the opposite, because the explanation is exactly the opposite. The more you develop the capacity of working with your brain, thinking deeply, complex, and so forth, the more active remains your brain. It's like, your muscles, the more you exercise, the stronger you stay, the longer you stay, healthy. And that's the same for the brain muscles. So those who actually had a complex writing, they were quite, late in terms of developing Alzheimer. And the correlation was super high and super strong. So this is an example of an interesting and very classic research design. Before we move on, a couple of takeaways. There is a bad lesson in this example for you writing your master thesis, which is writing complex. No, if you want to prevent your Alzheimer and therefore you write complex sentences, no, please don't do that. Try other practices. For your thesis, for your work here, just use simple words, simple sentences. That's a part. Second point, this is a piece of text, as you see here, which I got not in the original paper that conducted the study, the non-study, in a recent book, which I absolutely recommend to many of you. It's an interesting book to read anyways. But I got this piece of text from Fry book. But Fry is referring to the original study, which is this. How should I cite this idea if I want to write it in my article, in my thesis? Should I refer to Fry? Should I refer to Really? Both? It's a very common point, technical. So let's say there are, different ways of referring to an idea like this here. If you only want to refer to the original study, really, even if you read the original study in a different text like Fry, but you don't actually use any word or any phrase that Fry wrote exactly, if you just learn about the original study and you want to refer to the original study, you always refer to the original study. You don't need to refer to this intermediary place that you got this reference or this idea there. Because at the end of the day, you need to say who was the owner of the idea. That's when you don't want to use any wording, any phrase that Fry said that. But if you want to say the way that Fry is reporting the idea of Really, then you need to refer to both of them. And there you may have a direct quotation from Fry, which then you put that in the quotation mark like the second one, you refer to the Fry, but in the text, you indicate that this is coming from a different source, the second one. In the first one, you don't use any direct quotation. You can simply say that Fry refers to the original source and then send that. Or even if you don't use anything from Fry, you simply use the original source.